Last time on BPF.
Alright, so we're under the shed because it's raining out. And so I wish I could give y'all some better light, but I got to get this work done. It's time to sand and level this out. Now normally I do a lot of stuff by hand. This is a big piece, so I'm going to bust out my electric power sander. Now this is a Tack Life. It's got the adjustable speed, and anytime you're working with carbon fiber, you want to work with maybe a 320 grit, one of the lighter ones, 400, because you don't want to burn through that weave. And then you're going to have a constant flow. You're not going to want to stay in one area and burn through anything. And be careful with your edges. Edges will always be done by hand. You can come up to the edge, but don't round and corner this edge because you'll cut right through it. So 320, adjustable speed will never go beyond the 1 speed. Just take your time. So let's start this off. So you can see some of the unevenness. This is a high spot, low spots obviously. Now I'm going to keep going with it until it kind of levels itself out, but I'm not going to hit these low spots too much. It's more of focusing on the high spots. Now when you're sanding, you want to frequently wipe and then make sure that you're not seeing any like cut through, and to see that you'll see like the actual weave particles kind of a silvery color. So once you see that silvery color, try your absolute best not to go any further. But like I said, I'm just going to knock this down to a decent or as close as level to possible, and then I'm going to go by hand with like maybe a 400 and a block, because the block is what's going to get you a nice non-wavy surface, where these power sanders don't always give you a nice flushed surface. That's as far as I'm going to go. Take my rag, wipe this down. Make sure you're not cutting through anything. Make sure that no exposed weave is coming through. Now you can braze these edges like so, but don't sit at an angle or anything. Just kind of braze against it. Sometimes epoxy will collect in these little corners here. Another area to pay attention to is right here at the beginning of the trunk, because there's always a little arch here. On just about every trunk I've come across, I rarely come across a flat solid piece. So there's always this little arch, and what happens is the epoxy likes to drop down and collect where this flat piece and the end of the arch meet. So if anything, just braze against that, and then the rest you definitely want to do by hand. So you can feel it. For me, I feel like still a lot of ups and downs, and highs and lows is what I'm trying to say. And so we definitely want to come back with a flat block and block everything out. A lot of people only use the power sander and they stop right there, or get it a little nicer, and then they expect the clear coat to finish it off. Now when the sun hits it or you move different angles, you will see the wave of different epoxy levels. And that's when you come across someone who's not really OCD, or they don't really pay attention to that detail. And here, BPF really we like to make it look super flat and mirror-like. And so we always have a lot of people ask us, well, how'd you get it so flat? The key to flatness is a block. A block and a piece of sandpaper and some hand, like elbow grease and love, and that's how you get that real flat. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the face, and then we'll come back with the block. Okay, time for the face. And just a friendly reminder, this remember, it was when we laid the epoxy, it was sitting vertical, and so a lot of the epoxy doesn't lay as flat as it does on the surface. So from here on out, this will be one piece as an epoxy coating, and then I'm going to stand it up, and this will be a whole separate piece, and that way the epoxy really levels itself out really well. And that's why you can see more of the weave pattern in this epoxy coat. So just remember to do this as a real light coat. You don't want to go too deep. And then this one at the moment only has 2 layers, so I'm not going to go too intense on this section. And of course, all of this, unfortunately, has to be done by hand. And that's where the fun really comes in. So I'm going to get this started and then bust out that block. See, so this is what I'm talking about. You see how you can see that texture so much more intensified than when we were doing the sanding the top? And that's just because when it's sitting, when it's not laying flush, it doesn't flush itself out. It kind of like catches onto the weave. So this is where it gets kind of iffy, because you want to keep sanding into where you don't see so much of this bumpiness. But the issue with that is sometimes the epoxy just doesn't lay as even. And like I said, it's because of the way the trunk was sitting as the epoxy was applied. So I'm just going to kind of get it into this mode, and then the rest is definitely going to have to be by hand, just to guarantee that I don't cut through that weave. It's a longer process, but I'd rather take that time and hand sand it than have to relay this entire piece or give it to my customer with some intensely burnt weave. Okay, so this is as far as I'm gonna go. I try to get some in here, but you gotta really be careful in there so that it's not really, I guess I was just trying to do a little bit of a head start. You do have a collection here at the bottom of the framing. So yep, all this now has to be done by hand. If you want that super sweet, perfect finish, then yeah, by hand. If you want to risk burning through that weave, keep on going. All right, so it's time to go ahead and sand with a flat surface. So I have a spongy kind of block. I also use this for wet sanding. And then I have a 3M wet dry rubber squeegee block. This one also guarantees a nice flat surface. So it's a little harder to hold, but it's really good for the small areas. This is good for like your turns and edges. Now I'm going to start off with the 150 grit. Never mind my chicken out there. Sounds like she's pushing out an egg. So I'm going to start with the 150 grit and then eventually get to the 220. Now be careful with this 150. It is going to leave scratches, which epoxy will fall into, which is fine, or the 220 will also surface out. But you want to be careful with that around the edging and everything like that, because it will cut through the weave. So I'll just show you a quick example. Now normally I sit on the chair and I put it on my lap so I can be real close to it. You can do it on a workhorse. So you're pretty much just standing with the flat surface. Now this does take longer, but it's going to guarantee that you're going to have a nice smooth finish instead of a wavy finish like you see on a lot of people's skinning work. And they just don't take that extra time to block it. Now, I do have big kid blocks. I just don't have the right grit sandpaper in stock right now. So I'm using these smaller ones. But on a big area like this, I have big kid blocks about yay long, long, and then some that are this long. Those would actually be good to use on a nice flat surface like this as well. See, so when I'm coming up to the edges, I'm just doing it real nice and soft, real quick. I'm not staying there for a long period of time. And what's nice about epoxy is you can kind of see your highs and lows. The highs will be a darker gray, and the lows will be a lighter gray. So you just keep cutting into where both colors are pretty similar. All right, I already cleaned it off with my 70% alcohol. Now it's time to do the spongy coat. Now this is gonna, since it's already really pretty smooth, and Already got it all cleaned up. All we need is like 2 coats of the 207 crystal clear hardener and a nice smooth spongy coat. Now I like the spongy coat because it doesn't leave bristle marks. So it's an easier sand. Right now I'm just making sure that all little dust particles and everything are off. So I'm going to do this area along with this area because of the way the trunk is sitting. It'll like fall into everything nicely. Then after all that's cured, probably tomorrow, I'm going to lift it back up so I can do the face so everything falls into these pitted areas. So with our spongy coat, we just go nicely, not too thick, and just brush it on, work it in. All right, so I want to show you, I showed you the piece in the sun, but I do want to show you in the shade so you can see how rough that epoxy can look. It's very hard to get it ultra smooth unless you're doing a very small piece. You even have some runs right here. The surface here is not perfect, so we got to sand that down and make it super smooth. So 320 grit with the power sander on number 1. As you're sanding, it's going to come with experience. Like, you're going to be scared at first, and you have to learn the thicknesses of your epoxy coats. So as I'm sanding, right here is already nice and smooth. Of course, I'm still going to hit this with a 400 grit with a block and just get any little possible wave out. But as you're sanding, you'll see these darker areas and the lighter areas. Those are still brush strokes that are showing as I'm sanding. So what I have to do is sand and then wipe away and then keep sanding again. If those lines reappear, then they're still slightly there. You still have highs and lows. The highs being the whiter part and the lows being the darker part. So you have to still keep sanding so that way that goes away. Now, most of the time you don't feel it too much. You have to have a very sensitive hand. Since I do a lot of body work, I can see with my hands. And so I feel for the highs and lows. And even though it looks smooth for the most part, but when it's all sitting in the sun with the clear coat on and you're looking at it from a side or you're walking around the trunk, if you don't sand it really smooth, you'll see all those little waves, and I really just don't like that. And so this is how I get it so smooth. I get a lot of people asking me, how do you get it so smooth? Well, just my OCD kicks in, and like I said, I see with my hands, and I just keep working it until it's smooth. Of course, I don't want to burn through the fabric, so I'll take it as close as I can, and then I'm going to block it. But that's how I get it so smooth. The secret's out. It's just a lot of know-how, experience, and just feeling with your hands and trying to get that high and low out of there. All right, 320 done. Now I'm gonna have to bust out the 400 wet sanding with the block. It's pretty smooth. This is where I have to do all by hand and get that smooth as well. Right now I'm gonna go ahead and drill out the holes, and then also turn it around and drill out the holes that are here as well. So this is the bad boy that it's going on. Hopefully I'll be able to get some video once the parts are installed. Have it all tied together. This thing's on air suspension, some nice engine mods. Okay, so now it's time to cut out the tape. This is the fun part. trying to remove this tape. From here, you get a razor blade and just slowly kind of scrape away, and it cuts away. Just some areas the epoxy sits a little thicker and some is thinner. If you kind of do a pre-cut, and if you can get a little lip of the tape, you can nicely pull it out. So I'm going to have to do this, add a little bit of body work in here, and then get this section painted. Self-etching primer. This is what you want to do on any metal that has been exposed. So there's some metal that got exposed here. It didn't really have any self-etching primer on there. If you look close enough, it already has kind of like that army green or olive drab color. That's a self-etching primer. So it comes like that from the factory. So we want to put that back on the metal so that way it doesn't corrode after a long period of life. I don't know how long the customer is going to have it, but we want to protect it. We're going to go with satin. Now, I like this paint. It holds up pretty well, pretty durable. My customer didn't really care for anything too fancy, and it's because this whole section that I taped off, that actually gets covered by an insert, like a trunk insert. So we only need to just black out whatever's covered. My customer was okay with leaving it the stock red, but I want to go ahead and add a real nice satin black finish. So as you can see, the etching primer is all the way around. Some of the edges got some bare metal exposed, so we wanted to cover that up. So now let's go ahead and spray this on. First, you want to do your light coats and then go heavier. And then in the end, after everything's all said and done, if we need to do a touch-up coat, super easy to do. And there it is, a nice satin black OEM styled finish. It's a very nice color. I really like that satin. It lays really well. You don't see a bunch of spray lines, and it just makes it look like it came from the factory in that satin black. Now, most of the time when it does come from the factory, they don't even put clear coat on this side. They just paint it red or whatever color your car is just to match. But all in all, the satin black is a very nice color. So that's what I normally go with when I do any of the fiberglass lips or any kind of like OEM styled parts. I always use the satin black from Rust-Oleum. Alright, what we're going to do first, hit it with the self-etching primer, then my satin black, and then I'll hit it with the custom gunmetal black that I've made, and do this section first, turn it around, and then we'll do all the trimming. So that way it's easier to spray nice and clean this way, and then all the trimming will be done, and this bad boy is ready for clear. It's getting there. It's now time to paint around all the trim. All right, she's all prepped up, ready to go. Have all the corners off the edges so I can get some paint under there wrapped around the edge. Gonna be using our 2K clear. All right, so this is where we're sitting. All the face is done. Currently working on the surface. So I hit this with 1,000 grit, 1,500 grit, 2,000 grit, and then 3,000 grit. Sometimes I'll go into 5, but it wasn't really necessary. So I already did all that face. I'm currently on the top. Pretty smooth finish. So I'm using your standard compound pad, polishing pad, your finalizing wax pad. So this is the compound I use, Extra Cut Compound by 3D, the ACA 500. Also by 3D, I use a one-step correction glaze. This is a polish and protect. This really helps take out all the itty bitty little fine scratches. So if you want to detail your carbon fiber afterwards, good choice to go with. Then I go with an additional glaze from Meguiar's. This is your show car glaze. Puts a nice little glaze on top, leaves a real nice filmy finish, and then when you wipe it off, it's just immaculate. And then I top it off with this Cherry Flash liquid paste wax. And I try to get just that real show quality. So I'm going to finish it up here, and then we'll get some outside photos or video, and then eventually get the spoiler back on.